This is House Planning Help episode 387. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in new build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Will South from Etude. We're looking at his retrofit of a Victorian terrace property in Brighton. So you probably heard the old adage, location, location, location. That's what drives everything in property. And I've got a great story, a personal story. My parents have been looking for properties to downsize for quite some time, actually. They have a particular location that they like. But I thought, well, if we keep our eyes open, we can look for plot opportunities or a nice retrofit idea. And I've been doing that for 2 or 3 years now. We had one opportunity that came up that I thought, this is perfect. And then one of their good friends got in there first and they felt a bit awkward about it. So it didn't happen. However, they've been looking again and seen something they like. But what I know for a fact, because I've been looking in this area, is that the property and the piece of land that got built upon did not come on to the market. So what they'll be looking at effectively is something that has been built. It is a new build, but instead of having all that possibility of we can customize it to ourselves and make it exactly what we want, instead you're now buying off the shelf what someone thinks you will want. And when I went into the property, one thing I noticed immediately is that the ventilation was not what I would like. Probably complied with building regs, but was not as good as it could be. And I suppose I've become hypersensitive to that living in a low energy home where the ventilation is so good. So location, 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 that old adage, it still rings true. Let's get to our interview with Will South from Etude, and we're going to explore his retrofit of a Victorian terrace property. I started by asking him to introduce himself and tell me a little bit about his background.
So I'm Will. I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer by background, and I work in buildings and construction with a focus on energy efficiency in housing and in the education sector.
We're going to talk about your retrofit today. So when did it come onto the cards?
So I've tried to improve everywhere I've lived, including, rentals, flats, and sometimes that's been energy efficiency as in sealing up sash windows or repairing them. So really, as soon as we were moving again, we bought the property thinking ahead to think, we're going to retrofit. And how would we do that? So things like, is there already a loft extension? Because maybe we don't want that. How does it link to the other buildings? That sort of thing.
What else were you looking for? Because I think you need to describe the location, central here in Brighton.
Yeah. So we're right in the middle of Brighton, really close to the train station, and it's a smaller Victorian terrace. So it would have been a 2 up, 2 down sort of arrangement. And it's very central. So compromising on space rather than location. Although we've got a lovely space, there's only 2 of us living here, and we have a small yard garden, got a bit of a view. I suppose the dream list is always garden, garage, the perfect amount of space, open plan, but the garage bit had to sort of fall off the list, and the garden bit fell off the list when we wanted to be more central, near the coast, near the train station to get up and down.
And walkable as well must be an advantage. So what does that mean for cars? Do you have a car?
Yeah, we didn't have a car for a long time. So we walked to the station, and the train is all our travel. But we've both got nieces who are young and live in inconvenient places for rail travel. So we have got a car now almost solely for getting to family. So yeah, and parents who are getting older and things like that.
Take us through then the property as we might imagine it in our minds now. So what was here to begin with, and why did you like this one?
I really like a very classic Victorian terrace design where you walk in through the front door. There's a little bit of buffer space where you can take off coats and shoes. Stairs are in front of you, living area in this case to the right, and then a kitchen all the way through at the back. And then upstairs, we've got 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, which is also at the back above the kitchen. So it's a sort of very simple layout with a nice flow. And in this case, it was sort of left as it was, still with the outside loo and the back room had been converted to the bathroom. So it was nicely simple, not too mucked about with, and nice high ceilings as well. So that's even upstairs, which is a little bit unusual. There's much higher ceilings. I can't reach the ceiling, and I'm quite a tall fella.
What goes on the brief?
So nothing was off the cards. I work in energy efficiency, and so it had to be something which was going to work towards energy efficiency, and I wanted to do something which was deep retrofit, but not the deepest retrofit. So I work a lot in the passive house building standard, which is sort of the A grade, and I know you talk about a lot on the podcast, but I wanted to do something which was right for the building as well. And I think actually as we were doing it, this sort of realisation that not all homes would have to do as deep retrofit as maybe we used to think, and that heat pumps were more than capable of heating, the vast majority of homes with very little changes. And so if we went one step further, we could make them work really well and really efficient. So that was sort of driver was we need to install a heat pump, and we'd like it to be more comfortable. I've got lots of experience in ventilation systems, glazing, specification, insulation, so that sort of thing. So those were all on the cards. So we've done everything: walls, roofs, floor, new ventilation system, new windows. But a lot of it is as an experiment to show how it could be done, and it wouldn't have to be done on every home. It's that's the caveat, I suppose. Yeah.
But you made a very good point about doing what's right for the building. So do you have any tips on what is right for the building? You look at a building, what's right for it?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think it's personal. So firstly, it's very personal. I like to think of it for existing buildings in terms of opportunities. So with any building, there's going to be some opportunity. For a simple one would be if you've got a flat roof, like a rear extension with a flat roof, you can add an awful lot of insulation on a flat roof before it becomes a problem. In our case, we've got a loft, and the loft isn't tall enough to ever be a new room. So that's a huge opportunity. So we've got 450 millimetres of mineral wool in the loft and a sort of false floor, because we can sort of take that opportunity. And then the other areas you have to compromise, but there's probably normally less compromise than you think. It's sort of there's a ways of working around it or reducing locally to mean that you can get the right outcome.
So do you think you can do this, that you do what's right for the building, but you also do everything that you can think of, your fabric first, your ventilation, your renewables, heat pump?
You don't have to do everything. I think that's the first thing. So I think you're basically buying lower energy bills for the future and better comfort. The sort of low carbon piece comes wholly from decarbonising heat and moving to a heat pump. So most homes, there will be some fabric measures which enable that. So loft insulation I've already talked about, and replacement windows or improving the windows are pretty much always needed. And then probably something around upgrading or improving the heat emitters, so the radiators. Once you've got there, as far as you need it to go, anything further than that will improve comfort, reduce bills, probably make you a bit more resilient for the future. So we have done everything as a whole package, which is, it's a fantastic place to live. It's warm, comfortable, cool, dry, everything. And in Brighton, which is a very coastal, damp place, everyone's homes have got condensation on the windows, and it's hard to dry washing, and mould here and there. And we don't have any of that. So, early days, but literally no sign of any of that. So,
and what are your first steps? Is it setting the budget, or just having a quick look through your skills, what you're going to be doing yourself, and what's going to go elsewhere? Yeah,
I think there was the first step of an overall, what's the overall picture? So a sort of total retrofit plan. What would be the dream end point? Sort of irrespective of budget in a way, because you might not do it, but someone might want to do it in the future. Or you might not be able to afford it, but someone might want to do it in the future. For example, we don't have any solar panels, but I've sort of thought in the future there might be solar panels, and so I've allowed for that. Then you sort of roll back from that, and then it's about ordering things. We had some priorities, like there was a roof leak, and our rear extension, the floor and the roof, were in really sorry state. So they become the priorities. Generally, starting with the roof is a good strategy. A sort of old-fashioned building is good hat and good boots. So the good hat here was redoing a parapet, making sure the party firewalls were in good state and the chimneys were in good state before we did anything else, so that the building had a good chance to dry and be ready.
But you're not doing that first and then coming back to think what's next. You've got this plan and you know where you're going to go from that. So how does it play out in terms of time of what you're going to do when?
We ended up doing everything in almost one go, although it took a long time. But the sort of staging of it and deciding what you're going to do when is just making sure at each stage the building as it's left works. The main risk, I suppose, there is around ventilation and managing moisture in the building and making sure that you don't try and seal up the building or insulate it in one part without dealing with the ventilation. The priority often is doing a ventilation strategy, and if the end goal is a mechanical system, then actually getting that in quite early, because that means even without anything else, you're already managing the moisture and you can't really go wrong. In this case, we sort of did it all along aligned, and so the roof went in first and then the main bit of works, which we'll come back to, and the ventilation system didn't get switched on until that was all finished.
And in that preparation stage then, what are you doing? What's the paperwork? Are you doing all this yourself? Is it in your spare time? And how are we getting ready?
I did do the preparation myself, so that involved some drawing information, and it's a bit of a challenge for me because we're a consultant. We I might sketch the odd detail and help architects develop their drawings, but we'd never do the drawings ourselves. So in this case, it was like, now we've got to do it. And so I just did everything in SketchUp, created a SketchUp model for the house, and created my existing building and the proposed building. For us, we're in a conservation area, so we had to get planning permission for some of the work, mainly the replacement windows at the back, and I've changed the roofscape a little bit to fit the heat pump on the roof. So we had to get planning. So that sort of led a more drawing approach, because I had to draw them for the planners. Drawings can take on many forms. It could be the sketch intention. I think it's good to communicate the whole picture to the builder. You're gonna need a builder to do some of the work, or even to yourself to work out where the problems are. So I did do a full drawing set, almost as a hobby and as an exercise to sort of work out what I was going to do, rather than I don't know how much of it was needed. You could do it less. I also imagine in the future a lot of this will be not standard details, but certainly things that you can go off and improve on or change to your situation. So for example, there's a good website called retrofit.support, which has a sort of pattern book of details, and the idea is they develop those details over time and you can start from them. So some drawing, sketching, listing out, and then I wanted to do some of the work myself, but I've also got a job. And in the end, I just decided some really good advice I got actually was just to make a cost plan, a really thorough cost plan. And I actually paid a cost consultant who specialises in housing to do the cost plan, just because it gives you a sort of big long list of everything with a sort of starting point for all the prices. Most of them are wrong in inverted commas, but they're at least a starting point, and they give you a really good feel for actually, if I did everything, what would it all cost? And then from that spreadsheet I sort of worked back. I think it was like 400 quid something, because he's got a template, and it was a really useful thing, actually. Yeah.
So I was just going to say to you, so they give you the template, but is that based on how you say you're going to approach the building, or does it just cover all bases?
No, it was so I gave him some sketch drawings and what we were going to do, and it was a cost plan for our job based on his template. And that was a really good bit of advice I got from a friend who's a builder, who said, get some independent advice just so you got an idea to start with.
Were there any surprises in that?
Mainly how much finishing costs. So
they can vary, can't they?
Bathrooms and kitchens, and really we had the same experience with the builder, where there's such a wide range and it's very difficult to describe that stuff unless you've got an actual example of a product that you want, and you can say this one. Initially budgeting that sort of thing is quite difficult. So that was the main surprise, actually. The sort of physical building things broadly came in with what, it all seemed sensible. I was surprised that, because it's a fairly small building, the areas of any particular wall, roof or floor are relatively small. So actually the material cost for things like insulation, I thought, I need to decide whether I'm going to have mineral wool or EPS or cork or wood fibre, and that'll be a cost decision maybe. But actually the cost was negligible between them, because there's such a small area, it was all in the labour. So that was a bit of a surprise. Yeah, I didn't know that. Having that cost plan really helped, and then it also helped just shorten the list a lot to what we were actually going to do. There was a practicality side. So initially we were going to live in the house while we did it. So the first phase was going to be the rear return, which has got the kitchen and the bathroom, where the kitchen ceiling was sort of falling in, and the bathroom ceiling was, the tiles were very, very, very saggy and looked worrying. So that needed doing. So that was a sort of priority on that front.
Do you want to talk us around, wherever feels logical for you, just what is changing and how it's changing and the work that's happening, if that's not too tall an order?
Yeah, okay, so what has happened, I'll try and talk it through in my head. So
yeah, keep it logical.
Yeah, so I'll go through the fabric and then talk about the building services. So the fabric, the roof, walls and floors, we've insulated everything. But even though it's a small building, there's been a lot of different strategies. So at the roof, we've got small parapet right at the front, which has got insulation between rafters and a lead roof. Then there's a loft, which has got mineral wool loft insulation. And then the rear return has got Larsen trusses, so sort of a split stud, which is 400mm deep, which is fully filled with insulation in the pitch. And there's a small flat section of fiberglass roof, which has got the heat pump on it. So that's sort of all roof types, which isn't very sensible. You want to stick to sort of more.
You're
one
responding
type.
To the building, though.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So what we need where, and then the wall insulation. It's mainly internal wall insulation because of we're on the conservation area at the front, and at the rear we've got some external buildings which are connected to the house, and then a neighbour on one side. So those elevations are all 80mm wood fibre, with a bonding coat underneath, which is an insulated render made by Baumit, actually. So it's insulated EPS beads in lime. And that was really good because our walls are what's called bungarouche, which is a lime-based rubble wall. So to sort of stick anything to it is not flat, basically. And not many walls on existing buildings are flat, and insulation boards tend to be flat. So this was a good product to get, because we've got an extra sort of 10 to 20mm of insulation and provide a flat base for the boards to go on. So that's the internal wall insulation. And then the inner bit of our rear return, which is sort of onto our garden, we could do external wall insulation, and it made sense just to save some room space. So we've got cork insulation on that bit, which goes back to what I was saying about the materials. That was one of the areas where I sort of was umming and ahhing what to do. So we've got cork insulation. We went for that because it was going to stand open for quite a while, and I was a bit nervous about moisture getting into wood fibre or mineral wool. And the builder suggested it, actually. I don't know, not many builders would probably suggest that, but the builder suggested it, and I looked into it and I thought, why not? It's a lovely material. I've actually made some plinth seats out of it, the leftovers and things, so it was almost a shame to cover it all up. So that's the walls, and they go down, taken below ground. So the external wall insulation is taken below ground with EPS, right down to the foundation, and then the internal wall insulation is also taken down to the foundation with beads where it goes into the floor, which I'll come back to. So the floor itself, we had a very soft floor. In fact, everyone on our street has a soft area of floor which they perhaps put a bit of furniture over and ignore. Ours was unfortunately in the hallway and in the entrance to the living room. When we lifted the floor, it's a terrace house. These homes were built really cheaply and they were thrown up really quickly. It had 3-inch joists, so they were really, really slim, sitting on continuous bungarouche, but sort of piled up chalk. And there was ventilation, but it wasn't so great. But underneath it was fairly dry, and there was about 300mm void. So I just took an opportunity to move out and move next door, which basically into a vacant property. So we took that opportunity briefly and chose to take up the whole of the ground floor, which was a big move, but is probably also the best thing we've done.
Was that always the plan then for the floor, or did you want to have a good look underneath first?
It was the plan eventually, but what moved it to happening, I was just going to leave it as it was. What moved it to happening was being able to move out, because then you could do it all at once. You could have probably done it phased way. I know people insulate their floors between the joists, so we could have done something similar, but actually just dug it up. So the floor build up, we built a solid floor, took out all the timber, took out all the dwarf walls, and then we're left with, sort of 200 mil to 300 mil deep, with quite a good sort of chalky base. And so we scraped it back to give us enough space, and then have got EPS directly onto the more sort of sand blinding, but then EPS, DPM, plastic DPM, and then concrete screed, which has got underfloor heating in it. So very simple build up. There's no structure sitting on it. And that sort of screeding is good to do all in one if you can. So that was it made a lot of sense to be able to do it all in one as we could do it. The big disappointment was we lifted these lovely old floorboards, and I'd kept them all with the intention of putting them back down. And someone told me that, oh no, you definitely shouldn't do that because there'll be a problem with the underfloor heating. So I asked about 8 more people, and once they'd all told me that, I really reluctantly got rid of the boards. But unfortunately, they were just, as cheap as the building was built, they were just quite poor quality pine wood, which was really quite open grain and quite thin. So it would have just completely dried out and crumbled or moved way too much. So yeah, we had to replace the flooring in the end.
So period features, for example, in that room, you'd have a fireplace. What did you decide to do there?
Yes, we've kept both chimney breasts and both fireplaces as a sort of feature. There was a wood burning stove already in one of them, which my partner didn't want to get rid of, so that stays. But we've insulated the chimney. We've put a flue in, lined it, and insulated it with clay beads, and insulated the spare flue for upstairs. The other chimney was in, and then after we finished all the works and painted, we decided we were actually going to take it out. So that came out more recently. So downstairs we've got the original chimney, it's the original layout. Lots of it is actually the original skirting, but the second chimney breast has come out.
And the air quality in Brighton, we've mentioned we're very central, but are a lot of people using their fires in winter? Has that become problematic with the MVHR?
It hasn't become a problem with the MVHR, but it's a problem just in the street-wise, definitely. I mean, you get a lot of people using their wood burners as a sort of alternative to gas heating, and I think there's a bit of a thought that, it's environmentally friendly as well, which in our context it almost certainly isn't, and it's really bad for air quality. We're also in a smoke control zone, which means you need to burn smokeless fuel, which is essentially coal or a form of coal. And so you can really smell it on a still day. If you've got low cloud especially, you can smell it. We've got MVHR, which is a filtered air supply. I haven't noticed anything that I'd associate with fires or open fires in my filter. I don't spend that long looking at my filter, but I haven't noticed anything, and we certainly don't notice anything inside.
Have we completed a look around the building in terms of insulation?
I think in terms of insulation, floor insulation I mentioned, I suppose sort of connections with windows, so we made sure that the insulation came into where the window frame was wherever we could. At the back, we've replaced the windows, so they actually moved so that externally the appearance was the same, so the reveal depth looks the same. At the front, a more recent second stage was to do the sash windows at the front, and we just replaced the actual sliding bit, the sash, which were absolutely shot. They were mostly filler, and we put in vacuum glazing into new sashes, so the boxes and everything are original, but the sliding sashes have got vacuum glazing in a sash.
Do you think over time that the performance in terms of air tightness will go down for these windows, just as the sealing around the panes and everything?
Possibly. I would be surprised, to be honest. I suppose the weak points are where you open and close the seals, which have to compress and not compress. But keeping them clean and not exposing them to too much UV light, they should last a long time. I don't know.
You see a lot
in 20 years.
A lot of sash windows in very poor condition.
Yeah. I suppose the sash windows in particular, Yeah, they need maintenance. They're wooden windows. We've replaced the windows at the back with wooden casement windows, but wooden windows need maintenance. And I think we're not that great at maintenance in the UK. It's
a headache. I hate maintenance.
It's well worth painting the windows before they look like they need painting. That's the sort of I suppose the mantra. The sash windows, they're sliding sash, and you can sort of draft strip sash windows to improve the air tightness. I've used a slightly different draft strip, which is more of a rubber, I think it's EPDM, but it's a foam-filled rubber strip, which you'd see more on a casement window, but you can get ones that are for sliding doors and things. And that's more robust and gives better air tightness, but it makes the windows a bit stiffer.
Should we look at air tightness then around the building? How have you tried to address that?
So air tightness, again, it's the whole building. Really had a strategy at the beginning and tried to identify in each construction where the air tightness line would be. In some areas we could get there and we were taking enough of the material away to be able to create an air barrier. In other areas we couldn't, or mainly in junctions you just can't get to. So it was a strong effort, I'd say. It was probably maybe 75% of the way, and if you were going any further you'd be literally gutting the whole house and starting again. So all the floors, the intermediate floor and all the internal walls stayed where they were, but we did remove a lot of the external wall finishes, and so that meant we could do things like the bonding for any of the insulation is really continuous and runs in and ties into the next sort of air tightness material and is taped into the windows. The floor, the damp-proof membrane underneath the screed comes up the inside of the wall and is taped on in there. And then in the roof, I suppose the bit that's useful to people is in the loft. I basically put a membrane over the top of the joist in the loft, cut it around all the trusses and taped it, and then put all the loft insulation on top of it. It was very difficult to tie it into the top of the walls because you're right into the eaves and there's no access and things. I did that. I spent quite a lot of time in it, and we took, at the back, we extended the eaves very slightly to accommodate the external wall insulation. And so the last two tiles were off for a week or something. So I was up on the scaffold taping my air tightness around, and I did some of it with like lime plaster basically. So on top of the wall, I'd used sort of more wet products to work with the materials that were there already. So I tried to use membranes only where there was timber, and then everywhere else I used a sort of wet lime product.
And did you chase down the leaks at any point? Just looking, where is it coming from? Was it possible to do that?
Yeah, I know the building pretty well, but the first air tightness test I didn't really have until too late, just through practicality really. There was never any point where it was sealed enough to air tightness test and also useful to find leaks. So by the time it got possible to air test it, lots of stuff was already finished. I know where I haven't been or seen myself, and I would have thought there's probably air leaks there.
Is there anything that you could have done differently in that sequencing, or because this is a challenge, isn't it? It's what lots of people face.
Yeah, it's really challenging. Beyond just being there the whole time, no, that's not good. I think paying more attention to where services were going to go through the wall, which I sort of know from my work, and we did spend a lot of time thinking about, but for whatever reason, I didn't think about as much here. And there was just compromises I had to make on where the drains were running and the falls, which meant that they, essentially in two places they go pretty much diagonally through the air barrier over quite a long length. So it was really difficult to seal them there. And I think materials-wise, once you've got internal wall insulation on, and in our case wood fibre, it's very difficult to seal anything to it. Wet plaster things in and things is actually quite difficult to work with. So there's areas, where I can't really get back to, and I imagine there's some leakage.
So when Misha came in for the test, then what was the result? And I believe that you're still waiting on a final blower door test. Yeah,
so I had one before the sash windows were replaced, and we got an air permeability of 2.1, which is 3 air changes, which I was very pleased with. I think that was my sort of limit. I was thinking, okay, I think it'll be less than 3 air changes is probably about right. And actually it was exactly the number I'd put in my little energy calculation for myself. So I did a PHPP model, and that was exactly the number I'd put. So hopefully it's improved, and I'm hoping to get Misha's going to come back and we're going to do another air pressure test. I'm going to wait till winter though, so that we can do some more thermography. I might have opened up some of the leaks that I know about to try and mend them. And also it'll be a bit damper, so all the windows will just swelled a little bit maybe. That's the plan.
That's always an interesting thing to do, the thermography. Well done. I commend you on even trying it. What about services then? We've talked a little bit about MVHR, but what planning and how did that work? That was something you said you did yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the two big things on the servicing side are changing the heating system for a heat pump and the MVHR, the central ventilation system with heat recovery. The MVHR, as I said, I did myself, and I have done some before, but it is very, it's quite straightforward. It's not complicated construction. It's just working it out where it's going to go, the duct runs. And I think there is a bit of value, if you know a building really well, thinking it through and trying to work out and suggesting to suppliers who will do a design, but they don't know it quite as well as you, so you can sort of say, oh yeah, this would be possible, I want to put the ducts here. So in my case, the MVHR is in the rear return in the bathroom, which is directly above the kitchen, so the extract ducts can just go into the bathroom, into the kitchen. The distribution's really easy. The supply duct goes into the main house and up into the loft, and then comes into each bedroom and drops down alongside the chimney. And then we've made the chimney look wider by plasterboarding it in, boxing it in. So that's how the ducts work. So my general rule is, it will be different for most homes, but there is always a way. I think there's a sort of bit of a lazy assumption that's like, oh, I've got an existing house, so I couldn't do that. But actually, I think there's often is a way somewhere. The mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, we did it in a flat before where we hadn't done as many measures, and we just really liked how it makes the home feel. It doesn't smell when you come home. We don't have moisture problems. We can dry washing, which sound like very small, basic things, but it's just a sort of underlying worry that's gone away.
It's brilliant, isn't it? And I think it can benefit a lot of houses. But what would you say the air changes need to be? Because the ventilation systems are only efficient at a certain point, aren't they? So in terms of the energy that you're going to be using to run the system. So where do you think that is the benefits? It might be worth paying more money to have a ventilation system, but where is that point, do you think?
Yeah, you actually get energy savings no matter where your building efficiency is. The trouble is that you don't know where the air movement's coming from. So the system's got heat recovery. All the air that's extracted, 90% of the heat is taken out of it and comes into the supply. So there's a lot of energy saving there. The trouble is, if you haven't done air tightness, there's also other air leaks going on, which you don't have under control. It's a sliding scale, though. It's a sort of continuum. And as soon as you've installed it, even with no fabric measures, you're probably just increasing the ventilation, which is no bad thing. So if you compare it like for like, same ventilation to same ventilation, it's always going to improve the situation. And so seeing it as a ventilation improvement rather than an energy saving measure is probably a good way. And then as you improve other things, if you just did the insulation, you'd probably get to a situation where half to 3/4 of all your heating was just for cold air moving and wind blowing through. So it really makes a lot of sense to do quite quickly after even a modest bit of insulation.
So if you'd done that as a first step to integrate your MVHR system, would you have to switch it off and seal it every time you did a next phase of your project?
You'd want to protect it from construction dust, so you definitely want to switch it off, probably only for short periods if you were doing things that were dusty. So we actually did this in a previous property we had a flat, and I put the ventilation system in very early on, and then we replaced one window, and I switched it off and put a cap over the duct for the days we were doing the work.
What about switching over from the gas main then? How easy was that, and what design was necessary?
So we went to a heat pump heating system. We were redoing some of the heating and some of the radiator positions anyway. Again, it's sort of dream situation that we've got essentially a new heating system. When we moved in, there was a combi boiler, which is about 10 years old. It It had some life in it. We didn't have to do it straight away. However, because we were doing the bathroom, it was a good moment to put in a cylinder. And it makes a lot of sense to put the cylinder where the boiler was because all the pipe runs come to there. So that's what we did. In terms of the gas, we had an extra motivation to get off gas because we had a massive gas meter right in our hallway. It sort of comes up right at the bottom of the stairs and took up quite a lot of space, with also electricity meter and an old economy 7 timer. You can just stop it at the meter and they'll just cap it underneath the meter, take your meter away, or even just cap the meter, and you don't have to pay for that. However, because we wanted to remove the meter and the pipes, we had to pay for disconnection. So we've actually disconnected from the gas grid wholly, which was more than I thought. I think it was about £1,200, maybe a bit more than that. They had to dig up a bit of the road. They took the pipes back. It was quite more significant than I thought it was going to be. And in the end, we were just left with a pipe that comes to near where the front door is and stops.
I wondered whether some of that fee might be a deterrent to make sure that you leave it there.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, just the closing the road, there was all sorts going on. About 3 vans turned up. It seemed more complicated than I'd initially thought. But yeah, I took a photo. It was from them to stay, disconnection from the gas grid. I did think, if there's 60 homes on our street or something, I wonder how many of them would have to disconnect for it suddenly to become quite a burden to keep that bit of the gas network up and running. It's probably a problem for the future that we're going to have to deal with as these systems start to be decommissioned.
So you're taking us through the heat pump. Any other interesting points on that?
Well, I'd say it was difficult to buy the heat pump. It was difficult to get it installed, and I've spoken to other people and they seem to have similar experiences. At the time, the Heat Geek website and some of the independent training and some of the manufacturer training wasn't very extensive, and so I found it quite difficult to find somebody. In the end, my builder's plumber did do it, and they used it to get their MCS qualification and sort of upskill, which was really positive. On the negative side, I didn't know that they didn't have MCS, and I ended up not getting the boiler upgrade scheme grant. I think I was a bit disappointed with it. Got very complicated very quickly, so they sort of assumed that we wanted thermostats in lots of different places and that the radiator and underfloor heating circuit were on different zones. So I ended up having to change things a bit afterwards, which is a bit of a frustration. I think I sort of hadn't really looked into it too much myself and assumed that they knew what should be done, given that it's a really small home. So that bit was challenging. The other bit that was really eye-opening was just how much equipment you end up with inside. I think you think sort of, a cylinder, but actually with unvented cylinders, we end up with a cylinder, an expansion vessel for the heating, an expansion vessel for the hot water. They wanted to put a buffer vessel in. Then there's 2 control boxes. There were 2 zone valves. It just really started adding up. And I'd really wanted to cram it in quite a small area, which I imagine most people do. So that was quite surprising. So I think some lessons for me were buy a hot water cylinder which has got an expansion vessel in it, because they exist. They're a bit more expensive, but they save you a lot of room. Make sure you've got space for the heating expansion vessel, and then try and design out the buffer vessel. So we proved that one radiator which doesn't have a TRV on was enough volume for the heat pump. So the heat pump has a minimum volume that it needs for the heating circuit, and that radiator can provide it.
And can you get any cooling as well from your heat pump?
The heat pump can provide cooling. I haven't bought one that has that setting enabled, but I understand that you can modify them to give you cooling. We've got one circuit, and the heat emitters are half radiators, and then we've got some underfloor heating downstairs. So the underfloor heating, we could cool the slab gently, but the radiators, you'd quite quickly get condensation on them if we used it for cooling. We're quite lucky that we're a terrace sort of facing southeast, and the rear of the property is quite sort of shaded in the middle of the day, so it stays really cool. We have not had problems with overheating at all. Yeah, it's been really lovely actually.
And how have you found the transformation? How long were you living here beforehand?
We've had pretty much the same time either side. I think we had about a year in here, a year doing the work, and then we probably had a year and a half after the transformation, like the idea of transformation. I think when we moved in, it felt very homely very quickly, and it was nicely decorated and things, but there was a lot of you peeled back anything and you were really quite worried, just structurally. There was a bendy beam, there was a ceiling falling in, we had slugs behind the kitchen cabinet. It was a very damp property, and now there's just none of that. So that's really great. It's just a really lovely feel. It feels really, really great. And we just heat pumps love just trickle heating the whole time. So we've just set the thermostat to 20, and it's like that the whole year. So over the winter, it was just at 20 degrees all the time, whereas the previous winter we'd really been heating the room we were in if we were working from home and things, and it was downstairs particularly was really uncomfortable because of the air movement through the floor. So that's been a huge change. You can sort of sit still in the winter and it's not a problem.
And you got some figures, haven't you, on how things have changed?
Yeah, so putting some numbers to it. I mentioned the temperature. So our average temperature is increased and it's a constant 20 degrees, which is where we want it. We could have it a bit warmer, a bit cooler if we wanted to, but that's where it's at. We got rid of the gas consumption completely. So it was 158 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year, which is quite high. And now there's none. Obviously, we've replaced that with electric heating. So our electricity is around 40 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. And it went up about 20%. So there's a much smaller uplift than there was the reduction in gas. Carbon emissions terms down by 85% by my calcs. Yeah, so that's really, really significant. And with some PV on here, we could be net zero, I think. A lot of that's also there's only two of us. We don't have huge consumption. We're out a lot of the time, but there's always the context that goes with it. And then our energy costs have halved broadly. So we were spending about £2,500 a year on energy, and even with price increases in the meantime, it's around about £1,000 a year now.
And what about the budget? Where did we land with that? Did you fix it at the beginning, or has it moved a bit?
So in work, I've dealt with people doing self-builds and also just construction in general. So I was aware that the budget is a good tool to manage costs and isn't necessarily what you're going to spend. So in my head, we had a budget and I had double the amount that I knew I could spend. That was the sort of broad framework that I worked within.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Because I just thought, if you don't want to worry about money, and money is the sort of base worry often and can really upset, throw out loads of other things. So the way we worked it was we put a lot more on our mortgage. So we bought a smaller house to start with and put a lot more on our mortgage. And we had some inheritance and some savings, which I've essentially spent all of on the house. I think it's come in at about £150,000. A lot of that, we've also got a new kitchen, new bathroom, new flooring thing. So there's a lot of extras in there, but it's a really, significant. You could buy another whole house for that. So it's a really, really significant amount of money. And that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, where I've done a lot of this as a sort of stretch goal, experiment, almost a hobby, and to get the comfort in a home that we know we're going to live in for a long time. And actually parts of this you could do and you could spread it over a very long period of time. I don't have a £150,000 car, but I suppose I could have done.
That sounds very like my scenario here well, my nice house. Yeah. What lessons are we taking away from this, either for yourself or for other people? I know you've wanted to do as much as you can. You've talked about your professional development, but what else can we draw from what you've done?
Yeah, I was really pleased with the ground floor. I think for homes that have got a suspended floor, it is a step change not having air leakage through the floor. And so if you can achieve that in the joist depth because you've got really generous joists, then great. Maybe it's more disruptive, maybe it uses less material. But for us, the solid floor is great and it's an absolute game changer. And especially in the winters, and it allowed us to introduce underfloor heating, really gentle heat. It's really, really lovely. So that's one thing I would not hesitate to do again, despite the disruption. On the more challenging, would probably do it differently, and the heat pump and plumb area, so the sort of hot water cylinder and associated bits. I was quite disappointed. We bought a Valent heat pump and the Valent cylinder, which essentially are the best you can buy on the market at the moment. But the accompanying design from Valent as well, and then also how the plumber has to implement it, there's a lot resting on the plumber. And that's a bit unfair because they've got a lot to think about. And so I would have taken a bit more of that under my control and planned it a little bit more. I had ideas, sort of AI apps to plan pipe work on the wall, marking it all on the wall, making it really clear which pipes are doing what. There's a whole load of things where I could have improved that bit. The airtightness, I think I did a really good job in airtightness, and I didn't get quite where I wanted to be. I'd probably do it again, mend all the things that I know about now, and then find those other things or not do some of the things that I did do. So I probably took some opportunities and then knew that there were areas where it was going to be weak. Using the membranes and historic building fabrics, so particularly lime mortars, crumbly brickwork, crumbly mortar, they didn't work that well together. So you end, I think, using more wet applied paint on, and really going back to sort of quite traditional building materials and trying to use lime-based plasters and things as air tightness, even in areas where you can't see it, probably would work well.
Well, it's been lovely to catch up. Thank you for showing me the house. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for coming over, Ben. It's been great. Thanks.
Get more in our show notes today, which you can find at houseplanninghelp.com/387 for this session. You can review the key points in the summary we provide. We've got before and after photos, also checking out some of those construction details on things like how insulation was improved and air tightness and that floor that was mentioned a couple of times. Have a look there. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, we'll provide social media links so you can get interactive. Links to Etude, links to Will, houseplanninghelp.com/387. My call to action is to check out the Hub, which is our membership community, and it tries to do two things really. One is to map out the journey that's ahead of you, make sure that you get it right, and then the other is to network with people who are on this same journey. Just bring everyone together. We're all creating high-performance, sustainable homes that'll be healthy, comfortable, energy efficient. You know the score. So that's the idea, and we do it with various different features, whether it's the forum, the courses, office hour where you can have a chat with me, or if you want to look back at complete projects we filmed through various different projects so you can see retrofits or new builds, just get an idea for it. People often say that's really helpful to do that. We've got live training sessions with guest experts. Come and find out more, houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, John Palmer is my guest. For the last few years, he's been working on policy at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. We're going to explore the role of the building regulations. Thanks so much for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.